We've got an array of speakers. We've got Steph Lund from Ag Extra, Josh from Intergrain, Dan from AGT, Pat from Balco and Stuart from SeedNet. So they're all going to do a bit of an overview on some of the varieties we've got going.
Basically I work for Ag Extra. We have been doing the assessments on this trial this year. Todd did the sowing for us, and between him and Sadi they've done most of the maintenance on it. The barley time of sowing is in its second year of 3 years, and we're looking at heat stress, frost stress and different phenotypes within barley varieties best suited to this area. And then we've got the fodder trial here, which Pat will give you a bit more info on afterwards, but basically comparing the biomasses of different types of ornless wheat, barley and oats, and basically seeing what's suitable for grain production as a second option other than hay. So these, the time of sowing trial, first time of sowing was the 14th of April, then it was the 9th of May and then the 27th of May. We've got 5 varieties in there, Planet, Leabrook, Maximus, WI 4592 and Spartacus, and the buffers are Fathom, which was actually in the trial last year, but they're in the buffers this year so you can have another look at them. So far we've basically just done different growth staging on them. I've also done biomass cuts in them, and that's across both trials. The fodder trial was sown at the 9th of May, which was the second time of sowing. In terms of what we've noticed so far, there actually hasn't been that much frost damage this year. We'll have to have a proper look through the temperature data at that later and compare it with the rainfall, but we'll do that statistically a bit later on. I just ran quickly this morning through the biomass cuts. So far in the time of sowing trial, the first time of sowing Leabrook had the greatest biomass both in the wet and dry cuts. And then in the fodder trial, the King Bale oats, closely followed by the Brusher, but obviously we'll have a look at the yields on those afterwards and do a bit of a comparison there in the final data that'll come out next year. So other than that, it's had 60 kilo of DAP and 20 kilo of urea up front, and then it's had Boxer Gold and Argo at seeding time, and then a Paradigm a bit later on. So that's a brief overview of that.
So for those of you here who don't know me, my name's Pat Guerin and I lead the procurement and Techo team for Balco. So the Techo team obviously covers the growing of the crops, but it also covers the other end of the chain. My background is I'm a dairy nutritionist and have been quite active in the overseas marketplaces in helping to with the technical transfer. So when it comes to talking about colour of hay and thin stems and that type of thing, it's the type of commentary that I often will challenge because I'll always try and drive the conversation to come from an animal performance perspective. I was glad to hear that earlier that the highest biomass in this fodder section was in the oats plots. And here we've got 2 different oats. We've got Brusher oats and King Bale. Brusher oats is a good benchmark for the industry. It's grown widely in South Australia. It's one of the mid-season, so compared to the King Bale that's here, it's probably about 7 days earlier in maturity. In actual fact, the varieties that have been selected in this trial show quite a diverse range of maturity, and we see at the shortest growing season the Dictator barley here, which is one of a small group of ornless types of barley. I think the typical growing season for Dictator is about 90 days. So where we've got Brusher is more like your 102, 103 days, and the King Bale is probably a week later than that. But the aim of the trial here really in this fodder section is really to try and explore alternatives to the oats for fodder. We know that oats in tough finishing seasons are very hard, find it very hard to get to maturity. And one of the key drivers of making hay is to make sure that the head of the plant gets out of the sheath, so that you can get a bit of an easier drying process going on. So oats, if they have a tight finish to the growing season, and the last couple of seasons have been good examples of that, then the head doesn't emerge fully, and you've got mouldy sheaths there, so it takes longer to dry. Sits in the windrow for a longer time, instead of 1 or 2 weeks, it'll sit in the windrow maybe for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and therefore you're exposed more to the weather conditions. And believe me, we've seen the diversity of weather conditions this year. So we've got the Dictator here. This variety here is the other end of the spectrum. So this is a Ornless Bennett wheat variety. Looks great here, and if you were, in hindsight, if I was a hay grower up here, this season, you'd pick this variety up. But this season is not typical. Bennett is a winter wheat, and it relies very heavily on a good finish to the season. So it's a long growing season, but if you saw this in 2019, 2018, both those seasons, it virtually did nothing, because there was no late season there. So it's great for this one, but it's probably one of those in this area that you have it in the silo, and consider it in seasons that you think are going to be longer growing seasons. You've got the other end of it here, which is the Dictator. This one here is the King Bale. So this, maybe Josh would like to, in a sec, have a couple of words about this one. This is the IM tolerant variety. A take home on this is going to be that we, like the grain industry, are quite sensitive to residue chemicals, and we're going to need to ensure that there's no IM chemicals sitting in the sample at the end of it. So I think Josh will cover some detail, but my understanding is that a pre-M application is the only thing that's registered for this use. It'll fit in great the following year. Yeah, and that's actually where I see it fitting in, is that the washout year from a previous IM usage in the growing season is put this one in the patch. The Brusher oats. So this is commonly grown in the industry. There's probably half of the oats grown in South Australia are Brusher oats. It's a little bit shorter in the growing season. So this season clearly it wasn't this variety that you would have preferred to have had. But it tends to have good biomass yield and a feed test quality that matches that. So that's a good one. The two we have here are different AGT lines. Now Dan might like to talk about some detail here. They're obviously a little bit shorter growing season than the Bennett, but we're hoping that over time we'll be able to establish a core of varieties that have a good grain quality option paralleled with a good hay option, and that growers then can make a choice later in the growing season as to which one it supports. And both of these, maybe Dan can talk about what's the potential for release of them. They're not released at present, but looking at them, this looks like a great one here, and it's got a little bit better biomass yield by the height about it, so expecting that's going to link with biomass. From a stem diameter point of view, but I'd convert that over to feed test analysis. That'd be the fibre level, so NDF, neutral detergent fibre levels. Very, very thin stem. You'd think that the NDF is going to be very low on it, and that's a great aspect. So from an animal performance point of view, the lower the NDF, the higher the dry matter intake of the animal. So it's a critical thing. We would normally sell about 20,000 tonne of wheat and hay a year. So there's that market there. But what we wouldn't be, so that's 20,000 tonne out of about 220,000. What we wouldn't want is half our grower audience to all of a sudden decide that they wanted to grow wheat, because it wouldn't work, and the bit that seems to be not working well at present is when we get frosted wheat crops that are not there as a regular deal. So the market sort of is looking to buy them at a very discounted basis, and from a grower doing gross margins, it's lousy. It's sort of conflicts on where I'd say technically that the value of the product is, and so the aim here is to try and establish some strong, consistent marketplaces that would prefer to take wheat, and although I don't necessarily believe that it's all about orns versus ornless, that's some of the feedback that the market's given us, is that they don't want to play with orn varieties. So hence you notice that these 3 varieties are all ornless, and so is the Dictator. So we've been doing Moby barley for a couple of years, and for a few years, and that's sort of it's okay. Like, it's got some traction in the Japanese market, but it's not getting enough to give you good relative value. So generally, what we were finding was the biomass of the Moby was a little bit lower than your oat equivalent, and we're actually getting a discount on the marketplace for the barley. So it didn't make sense. So there's got to be a concerted approach to developing those markets and getting them technically correct, so that people are paying a relative value for them. From a performance point of view, if they're similar quality, I'd always say that the opportunity value of barley is a bit better than wheat or oats, because the fibre digestibility of the barley is higher. So you're going to get increased dry matter intake and better nutrient utilisation of the high digestibility. So that you'd have the barley there as the number one, and then wheat and oats are fairly interchangeable. Now, obviously, the feed test value and etc. Varies. So I'm talking about when they're relatively the same. But we usually go in with about 10 or 15,000 tonne of ornless in the ground, and have an arrangement with the growers that depending on the season, as to whether they go ahead and cut it or let it go through to grain. So in South Australia, predominantly that would be Orion.
Yeah, just quickly touch on the King Bale. So most of you probably heard. So it's a world first IMI tolerant oat and hay variety. So developed by Grains Innovation Australia, and us at Integrated commercialising it. So single gene. So it's only going to be, the only IMIs that are able to be applied is Century IBS. So no IMIs are going to be able to be applied in crop, which for 2 reasons. One, as Pat said, MRLs. Just at the moment, MRLs are all 0. So to give the plant time, it's better to do it for IBS, and also it just reduces biomass way too much. So, which if you're growing it for hay, that's what you're growing it for. So yeah, but very similar to Winteroo. So tall, yeah, will grow very similar to that. So I do imagine most of it will be used as a residue management tool for that year after. How much of that will be Century use? Do recommend using Century, I suppose, on the spot you're going to keep the seed for the following year. So
I think where some of the drive behind the IMI is that over time we're getting more and more admixture in the crops, and we're getting pushback from the marketplaces. So in these cases, particularly barley grass, brome grass, spear grass, those types. I mean, ryegrass has been around for ever and a day in hay, and a dribble in there seems to be acceptable. But when you see a dribble of barley grass or brome grass in there, you can just about count every plant head that's in the bale. So it sets itself up for failure. We seem to be getting more areas that have got issues with that. So I think that these are going to fit into a rotation there somehow.
Definitely. And so the Century registration is due in March next year. So talking a new farm, there shouldn't be any hold-ups, and then should be good to go for next season.
So we're interested in these ornless wheats. Like Pat said, we'd like them to go through to grain, but you know, if you're in a frosty area or you just want to make some hay, they make good hay. So these are our 2 most advanced lines in the AGT program. They're actually out of one of our New South Wales breeding programs, so they're not I think there's probably better adapted stuff coming through the Roseworthy program for South Australia, but these are the first things that we're looking at. So the two here, this is 944O, this one's 945A. The 945A is a little bit quicker than the O and a bit taller, so I think it's probably better suited to what we want down here. But they're both still longer than something like a Scepter or even a maybe even around a Trojan type maturity or longer. So late April, early May sowing for the grain job, I think. Down here, we'll see how they go. But our aim with these things is to have an ornless wheat that's AH quality, and you can make some decent hay out of. So these are the first ones, but I think after that there'll be some probably better options for you guys as well. And all the other breeding companies are working in this space as well. So I think in the next 5 years there'll be quite a few options in ornless wheats. Both of these, we've entered them into the NVT system this year. They're not in the main season, so we'll have a look at the main season NVT after this. They're not in that because they are a bit longer maturing, but they're in the early sown NVTs around the place. And then we try to put him in some trials. So this was in the trial here last year. I think they went pretty well. The stuff that we work with in Roseworthy is obviously adapted to South Australia, and so they've probably got a bit better adaptation to South Australia, probably a bit better grain yield as well.
Yep, sure.
You talked about that comment before on Dictator barley. In terms of like dry matter production, it doesn't actually produce that much dry matter. It's not known for dry matter production because it's you know, most of your Compasses and Leabrooks and Planets and Beasts and all these varieties, they will probably give you more dry matter production. But what makes that good from a hay perspective, and I didn't make it clear, was that it's ornless. So they're the only ornless variety of barleys around, Dictator and Moby. But it's really it's for grazing wise, it's purely just a speed to feed thing.
Yep.
Yeah. So it just gets from sowing to grazing heaps quicker than any of the other varieties.
And you graze it off and she'll grow back again with a bit of rain?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's purely its place, yeah.
Yep.
Now, back on our variety. So yeah, so Bennett. Bennett is a winter wheat. Now, I'd probably talk more about it with the knowledge of it in New South Wales, but what we've found with Bennett, I mean, I will address the white elephant in the room, which is the rust. We'll go straight to that, the negatives first. It is a sucker for stripe rust, and it has broken down to the 198 strain. I don't know if we've seen any of that in South Australia. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, so it does get stripe rust. And so in New South Wales, they're looking at managing it with impact on the fertiliser now, and it could be a 2 to 3 spray crop. So that does suffer from stripe rust quite badly. But what we've found in New South Wales, which gives it its advantages, is that it tends to have it's quite adaptive to its sowing window. So there's a very big sowing window. You know, 1st of March through to probably even you could say the end of April. 1st of March through to the end of April, it's got a massive big sowing window, which is what we've found, so it's very adaptive for that reason. But it is a long season winter wheat. The difference with it is that yes, it's ornless, which is if you're grazing a crop out, that's good. If you're making hay, that's great. So it's a benefit to the variety. But it is a white grained variety, and it is an ASW grade. I don't know, I'm not sure about here, it might be feed over here. Might be feed over, but it is a white grained milling variety and ASW in New South Wales, but here it might be only feed. You know, I'd have to check that out. I'm not 100% sure with South Australia.
I think it's ASW.
It is ASW here? Righto, so yeah, so it is ASW here. So ASW here, which is good, so it's a milling variety, should it go through to grain. And I've had some really good comments about how the quality of hay it makes.
Yeah, no, it makes good hay.
Makes very, very good quality hay. Yeah, so in New South Wales, it's known for its dry matter production as well. It's getting a real reputation for a heap of bulk and a heap of dry matter.
Probably a common trait from a feed test point of view for all later maturing varieties, whether they're what species they are, whether they're wheat, barley or oats, is that the fibre digestibility is improved. You know, so that sort of goes with the maturity of the plant relative to the season, and so a longer growing season variety is typically going to have, within a season, is typically going to have better fibre digestibility. Now that's playing up against the head emergence bit. You know, I talked about that you've got to get the head out of the boot to max the drying out, the wilting phase, or minimise the length of time in it. It's no different here. You've got that competition going. But if we get varieties where the head extends, emerges at an earlier phase, then there won't be any roadblocks in cutting earlier, because in actual fact the feed test quality parameters are going to be more favourable rather than less favourable. It's more about playing with the weather then.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think here winter wheats I don't think really have sort of taken off in this area. Generally probably don't have what you consider enough rainfall, in-crop rainfall, to justify the winter wheat. So Bennett's the type of variety that you would sow early if you got an early break, as early as 1st of March. And the theory is obviously then if you got that much, if you got enough rain, you probably get that much grazing out of it that you would actually just, if you get that tight spring that you referred to, you just graze it out, because it does give you a lot of dry matter production. Some of the dry matter trials have been done are up there with oats.
And what you might do here, you know, with a variety like that is actually put it in there as a grazing option, graze it, and then lock it up again if the season supports that.
Yeah. The amount of grazing you'll get off it, grazing benefit, will probably justify you sowing it there compared to other varieties. So up in New South Wales, it goes head to head. Well, not head to head so much, but it's similar to, you've got Illabo, Kitty Hawk and Wedgetail. So Wedgetail, Kitty Hawk and Illabo are the three big ones in southern New South Wales, but they're pretty locked into shorter. They're all got awns, those varieties, and they're also locked into a shorter sowing window as well. So Bennett, with it being awnless and having a more adaptive sowing window, but also a longer, earlier sowing window, is what gives it its benefit over those varieties. But there's a lot of people in southern New South Wales growing them in conjunction with Kitty Hawk and Illabo. I don't think you use or sow or grow Bennett wheat unless your intention is to graze it. Yeah, otherwise it's just not you won't get the benefit out of the variety unless you've definitely got to graze it.
How heat tolerant is it when it's young? Because if we're sowing 1st of March around here, we get some pretty nasty days.
Yeah. So I'm sort of, it's a great point, because I'm sort of talking more southern New South Wales now with that March 1, but you'd have to sort of weigh that up, how early you could go with it based on heat and temperature.
So Leabrook was first year of seed sales was 2020. So this season is its first year in commercial seed sales, and so the main development with this is that where all things going to plan, it looks highly likely, all things going to plan of course, that it will go around about March. We should have an answer, but it will essentially go into the ground next year for a 2021 sowing as an accredited malt variety. So it hasn't been accredited yet, but with a bit of luck, and well, not luck, but all things going to plan, will be go into the ground as a sown as an accredited malt variety. So Leabrook, I don't need to say too much about Leabrook. It's very, very similar to Compass. It's a full sister line to Compass. NVT shows that it's not in all cases, but consistently it is slightly higher yielding than Compass. It definitely has better grain size and better screenings, and it's just a slight improvement over Compass. It's all slightly, there's very slight minor improvements over Compass, but it did have improvements in all those areas. And I think it's slightly better disease package as well. Again, in all areas of varietal improvement, there was enough improvement in this over Compass to be a variety, and it's, albeit slight.
Maximus, which is Spartacus replacement coming for next year. So as with the Leabrook, it's currently going through malt accreditation, all things going to plan. It will be get full accreditation March next year and go into the ground year 1 as a malting variety. so which is looking very good. So compared to Spartacus, very similar yielding. We are hoping in a better finish that it will stick its head up a little bit higher above Spartacus in terms of yield, but its biggest thing is its disease package over Spartacus. So this year, well, last 2 years, Spartacus has got pretty well hammered by netform net blotch down Yorke Peninsula in particular, which has done a hell of a lot of damage. Maximus is a step up and remained very clear for it. So we've put a fair few tonnes down there this year as market development, and it's remained pretty clean. So feedback down there has been it stood up really well. So yeah, to step up across almost all diseases and plumper grain. So yeah, all looking very good. Probably 2, maybe 3 days slower than Spartacus maturity, but much for muchness. So yeah, slightly more purple looking. I don't know if anyone, does anyone grow Latrobe? Looks fairly similar. Don't put IMI over your Latrobe, but you can over this. So yeah, Clearfield variety as well. So yeah, I know in Victoria there's a lot of Latrobe grown, so just make sure you know which one's which. So yeah, and yeah, ready to go. Seed available right now through Boolaroo Seeds.
Any higher than Spartacus?
Maybe half a head, but I mean even then you're pushing it. It still is. Yeah, Neil wouldn't even say that. Yeah, so very similar, same plant type. Originally we did think it might have slightly better early vigour, but at the end of the day it's the same upright plant type, semi-dwarf. We also have the new IMI barley coming out next year as well, which is a Compass type. So hasn't got a name at the moment. There's IGB 1908 and IGB 1967. I'm really hoping for a decision in the next 2 weeks. It's taking a long time, but once we pick one of them, I would say is available next year, but I would say if we're not sold out today, we are next to sold out. So yes, got to catch up with Neil afterwards and find out about how it's all going. But yes, I think we're pretty much sold out now. So, but at the end of the day, it's going to behave very similar to Compass. It's going to have all the positives, the early competition for weeds, IMI tolerant, but it will also, and good grain size, good grain package. It will have the lodging and head loss issues of Compass. And it hasn't entered malt accreditation, so it will be feed fired. So that's the next 3 years. So keep in mind.
So this is WI 4952, and so it was bred at Adelaide University but developed by Sacobra, the French malt barley breeding company, which hence the name La Perouse, a French explorer. So yeah, that's WI 4952. So this variety here pretty much really sits on its own in terms of plant type and maturity group. I was at a phenology field day up in New South Wales the other day, and they had all the barleys grouped into phenology or maturity, and they obviously had Compass, Beast, Leabrook, Latrobe, Spartacus, Maximus, all grouped together as a very quick spring. And they had, then the next one along was La Perouse, which they had as a quick spring. And then from then on, then the next one along was Planet, which they had as a mid to quick. Which is, I think, is the new language that they're using now. So so Planet really sits on its own as the longest maturing variety. Then second to that is the new La Perouse, and all the others are within that close to each other that they're all grouped together. So yeah, so it sits in its own phenology bracket or maturity bracket. We expect this to be we're hoping, again, all going to plan. Seed will be available of this variety. This is first year of seed sales will be 2021, and we hope for it to be, by the time we sow it in 2022, that it will be an accredited malt variety. So yeah, so seed will be available this year, next year for 2021 sowing, but 2022 hopefully will go in the ground as accredited malt variety. We probably not so much suited to here, being as in Planet is also probably not suited to here. In a season like this, yep, you might get away with Planet and you might get away with La Perouse, being the longer maturing varieties. And of course, with that longer maturing variety comes a higher yield potential. But we really, given the right season for both Planet and La Perouse, we would expect them Planet, nothing to out yield Planet. We would expect Planet to top the yields in the right season. We would expect La Perouse probably to hopefully come in behind Planet, and then the rest from there on in. So, but the difference being, for it to reach its yield potential, it has to have the right season. It has to have that longer growing season, higher rainfall season. So it's not as long as Planet, but yeah, it's longer than the majority of the varieties that are grown here. So yeah, it's fit. Very big, very big grain size. So it's very, very large grain. Is probably another one of its good disease package. And again, I'm not going to talk about saying it doesn't lodge, but definitely has improvements over. It definitely doesn't lodge anywhere near like Compass. So it does really good, strong straw strength, and really does stand up.
So yeah, the wheat NVT here, sown on the 11th of May. It's looking really nice. Probably the best Bullaroo NVT we've seen for a few years. I think last year, maybe even the last two, if I remember, were scrapped, which is disappointing, but that's the seasons. But this year it's spectacular, so you should get some good results for the area. So Josh and I will go through here. Stu, have you got anything in here?
No, I don't think so, no.
You guys are handling the BASF stuff?
So I might just make a general comment about that, but yeah.
Okay.
On at some stage, yeah.
All right. So in here there's 48 different lines. So about half of them are released varieties. The rest of them are unreleased stuff from the main commercial plant breeders. So AGT, Intergrain. There's stuff in here from Longreach / Pack Seeds, BASF, Elders through Edstar Genetics are in here as well. So there's a bit of stuff here. But yeah, there's a lot of new varieties out in the last couple of years from each company. So I think we'll probably just try to stick to them. There'll be a lot that we skip over because there's 48 lines here and we don't want to be here all day. So we'll sort of roll on, move together as a group, and we'll discuss these lines. Anyway, first one's Emu Rock, which is an Intergrain.
We don't have to do too much on Emu Rock. Still a bit of it getting grown. We're just about gone now, so yeah. No.
That one's history.
Yes. Gone the way of the emu or the dodo. Yeah. So yeah, that's all right. Then I'll presume the next one's yours.
Yep. So this line here we've just released, it's called Denison. It's come out of AGT's Western Australian wheat breeding program. We run 4 breeding programs around Australia. The one over there is sort of working with similar germplasm, I guess, to Roseworthy, but just in some different maturities and things. So this is a Mace type, I guess, but it's a lot longer maturing than a lot of the varieties that you might be growing. So if you take Scepter, I guess I'm assuming everyone's sort of growing Scepter or maybe back to Mace and use that as a bit of a benchmark for everyone. This is probably up to 2 weeks quicker, longer maturing than something like a Scepter, so you can really push this into mid-April. The last 2 weeks of April, even into the start of May, this will do very well. It really holds the maturity of the flowering date. And then sowing it at that time, you'll get the similar yields to like a mid-May sown Scepter. So it just opens that sowing window even more than something like a Trojan probably people have grown before at the start of the program. There's things like Rockstar and Catapult and Cutlass and those sort of varieties out there. Aimed at sort of Anzac Day onwards. This is before Anzac Day. It's APW, good grain size, test weight, disease package is pretty good for this area.
This is one of our unreleased lines, IGW 4502. At this stage there will be some seed available for folks like Neil and maybe a little bit of other stuff around the place. So this is sort of similar-ish to that Denison, that probably even that mid-April sowing. So it's a Clearfield. Just received AH last week, so I'm expecting a name in the next few weeks to come through. So just another option for that if you get that early sowing option and you want to get your Clearfield out of the way.
BASF are now a wheat breeder in Australia, and they're based at Longanong in Victoria, and they've got a wheat breeding program. And basically there's SeedNet are the commercial partners to the BASF wheat breeding program. So any variety that gets released out of the BASF wheat breeding program will be commercialised by SeedNet, and then further on from there available through the SeedNet seed partners, like Neil. So there is a variety being released this year for sowing next year, variety for sowing next year, but it is a very long season, high rainfall / irrigation even variety called Ascot. So so Ascot will be out available for seed sales, first year of seed sales next year. But it's not suited to this area. But that's a high rainfall irrigation variety. So just want to make comment more around things to come and things to look out for as we go along with BASF.
Ascot is in the trial. It's the last one along here. There are some longer maturing, higher rainfall, I guess, suited varieties in this trial. This trial is a part of the Mid-North set, which includes Turretfield, which is at Roseworthy, Mintero, Bullaroo, what have I missed? Spalding. And so, I think a lot of stuff gets put into that Mintero trial. If it gets entered into there, it generally goes through the rest of these trials. So anyway, that's why we've got a range of maturities. Josh?
Yeah, so this is another one of our numbered lines. Again, I don't know heaps about it. Apparently, probably that Trojan Rockstar Catapult length maturity, really good grain package, and another IMI. But I'd say that's getting closer to a name in that. But I only just found out about that one the last couple of weeks. But looking pretty good. So a bit taller. Chief, what's the main Clearfield wheats most people are running with? Thoughts? You're not growing Chief, or you are? Yep.
Surprised me last year. I thought I had chicken feed.
Yep.
And then it went through with the best screenings and test weight out of anything that grew. So I don't quite know what happened there. Rubbed the head out, looked like rice.
Yeah. So I just say sort of it came out to be its fourth year. So it's done okay. Hasn't had a great year on YP where they grow a lot of Clearfield wheats. So been out for a little bit. APW probably looked more for a Sheriff as a better option from us for the Clearfield. So
Grenade up until this year, we'll talk about Hammer in a minute, but this was sort of the go-to AH Clearfield variety for South Australia. But I think there's better options coming through, and there is now up the road. So we'll move on. Scepter, I guess this has been the standard for a while. It's over 50% of the state is grown to Scepter. It's the one that all the breeding companies are trying to beat. And I'm sure that pretty soon we're going to start seeing some genuine Scepter replacements come through. There have been a couple of recent releases that are beating Scepter consistently for yield in most areas. So we'll talk about them, but still very hard to beat in terms of its wide adaptation, suitability for most of South Australia. It does very well, and that's why it's grown so widely.
Zen, this is one of ours, noodle wheat, so grown a fair bit in WA. We've got most of the noodle market over there, so no noodles grown, no noodle stacks over here, so not super relevant. So another one of our numbered lines. Edge line, Elders Genetics. Vixen. So this is one from us. This is second full season, highest yielding AH wheat on the market. Just performed really well, just keeps yielding really well. High rainfall, low rainfall. Tillers really well, which in a year like this, really hoping to see some really good top end yield potential. Keeps pumping out. A bit shorter, lighter stubble load. It's been performing really well. So it is a mid-quick, so that real mid-May sowing option. Don't want to go too much earlier because it is fairly quick, but sowing in its right window, big yield potential, especially for that quicker variety. So much of it being grown, and yep, happy with it.
I'm actually.
Yeah.
It's actually got a long head.
Mm.
And it is quite, as you said, it's quite short.
Yeah. Yep. And it seems to just keep putting tillers out, and so the year like this, really hopeful of seeing it. It's yielded really well in some tight finishes. It'd be good to see it yield in a.
And it came out pretty quick. So
yeah, it does move.
Last sown and first out.
Yep.
For us.
It definitely moves. So got to be aware of that. So I'd say from about that 15th of May, or around that week around 15th of May is perfect time to get into it. So it's an end of program variety. But really high yielding.
Yeah, Trojan. So it came out around the same time as Scepter and was probably the variety that a lot of people use in conjunction with Scepter. So it's a bit longer maturing. So a paddock or two at the front of your program and then move into something like a Scepter or a Mace. So it's been out for a few years now, and now there's other things in that that space, I guess, that people can look at. But yeah, it was a pretty, or probably still is a significant variety in South Australia.
So Devil, another one of ours, another noodle wheat out of WA. Goes okay here, but it is very similar to Scepter in its maturity, in its yield and everything. It's sort of, unless you've got that noodle premium, which we don't have over here, yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on, but probably other options around. So
Razor, this is a ASW Clearfield that we released a few years ago now. It's all about yield. It's the highest yielding Clearfield out there, but ASW, so it's a bit of a trade-off. But it's on the quickest side. The last couple of years it's done exceptionally well in trials. Again, it's sort of closely related to Mace and that family of wheats. So that generally means very wide adaptation. But for lower rainfall environments, this is done extremely well. This is Hammer CL Plus. This is our brand new AH Clearfield. So I guess this will supersede the other AH varieties out there like Grenade, Cord, even if people are still growing a bit of Hatchet. This has got a lot higher yield than those varieties. It's not the highest yielding Clearfield. You've got Razor and Sheriff's more or less around this. But yeah, if you're looking for an AH Clearfield, this is the go-to. So again, closely related to Mace. The disease package is better than Mace, so it's actually got some decent stripe rust resistance there. It's also good for wheat on wheat. It's got CCN, it's got yellow leaf spot. Cutlass, longer season, APW, photo period type, so that's like that's like Yippee. I think it's probably on its way out, APW. People tried it and maybe looking elsewhere. This is Ballista, so this is our brand new very high yielding AH variety. So Ballista is the highest yielding variety that the Roseworthy program from AGT has released so far. So this has got a yield kick on Scepter, 3 to 6% depending on where you are. More or less the same disease package as Scepter. The yellow leaf spot's a little bit less than Scepter, but everything else is more or less the same. Good grain size and test weight. But yeah, it's all about yield on this one again. A little bit quicker than Scepter, so probably back to a Mace type maturity. That's an AH. Yep. Okay, Catapult's a variety that we released last year. Again, it's very similar to that Scepter type, but it's longer season. So whenever you're growing, whenever your earliest planting date for Scepter is, you could probably push Catapult about 5 days before that. So it just opens up that sowing window a little bit, so it's sort of competing with that Trojan, even Cutlass sort of maturity. Rockstar's here somewhere as well that we'll speak about. So they're all a little bit earlier sowing opportunities than something like a Scepter. But again, sown sort of after Anzac Day, this is going to get similar yields to a mid-May sown Scepter. Really good for wheat on wheat, so this has got really good CCN resistance. It's got yellow leaf spot, grain size, test weight, that's all really strong, and it's an AH.
Sheriff CL Plus. So yeah, this is one of ours. APW, sort of that Trojan, Catapult Rockstar, length maturity. Yeah, APW, just a real consistent yielder, year in, year out, high rainfall, low rainfall, it just seems to just keep plugging away. So it's probably just behind Razor in this district for yield, but does have that step up in grade. So yeah, performed really well. Next to Rockstar. So yeah, again, this is similar maturity again to the Catapult and the Trojan and Sheriff. Earlier sowing option, AH. Very high yielding, probably its highest yielder in that maturity category. Yeah, it's performed really well in NVT. It's been out this year, not a huge amount went out this year, so next year's full proper year. And anyone get any in this year for the south? I know Neil, you got it in, yep. So yeah, just definitely, I think this and Catapult have definitely gone past your Trojan for your earlier sowing option. So I mean, it still is that last week April, first week May. But also holds its yield really well even when it went in. Like last year, I mean, most NVTs didn't go until mid-May, but they still performed really well. So it holds its yield even with a later sowing. So all looking very good. So yeah.